A brief note to any parents that might be listening in with children today. You may want to hit pause on this episode and come back to it later. There are discussions about Santa Claus in what follows here, and let's just say they disclose some proprietary information that some younger minds might not be ready for. Well, here we are, the final weeks of 2020, and all we got to do is make it through Christmas and the rest of the holiday season, and then we can finally say that we've made it. And as we close the cover on this crazy year of 2020, do I even dare say that there's a sense of optimism in the air? Next year seems to be the shining beacon of normalcy to come. Regardless what happens next year, I think this is definitely one of those cases where we all deserve at least a participation ribbon. Or maybe just a lack of participation ribbon, rather, if you want to get technical. But whatever the case, here we are, headed straight into Christmas later this week, and then into the new year. And I want to send you into the holiday with a rebroadcast of last year's holiday episode, which is all about this man, Santa, and the myths surrounding him and his existence, and how even though this is one story, we've all experienced it in very different ways. And it just seems a very fitting way to close out this year, and that we've all been on this wild ride through this entire year. But at the same time, we've also all experienced it in such different ways. We all had different experiences and traditions surrounding Christmas growing up, but by far the most unanimous icon of this season is Santa Claus. Even if you didn't celebrate Christmas at all, you still encountered this man and his myth. I mean, you can hardly ignore the large man that can be found in department stores and shopping malls alike this time of year, always dressed in a poorly fitting red velvet suit, seated atop his comfy winter throne. Whether you engaged this fantasy or didn't celebrate the holiday at all, we all encountered this man and his story in some shape or form. Some of us out there bought the myth wholesale. Did you believe in Santa Claus when you were a child?
I did, yes. Lock, stock, and barrel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I definitely did for a long while.
I believed in Santa Claus past the age that it was developmentally appropriate. Yeah. Yeah. It's fun.
And there are others that never believed in Santa Claus at all.
No, I didn't. As a child, no. My most of my life was growing up with a single mom, and my mom's attitude was she wasn't giving Santa Claus credit for what she was busting her butt to try to do.
And there are some that never even celebrated Christmas as children.
No, we didn't celebrate Christmas until I was 21. My parents, honestly, looking back, I don't even know if they really knew why we weren't celebrating Christmas.
And there's at least one of us out there that, well, maybe hasn't fully given up on the belief in Santa just yet.
I was still really young when I was kind of exposed to the lie that adults perpetrate that he's not real. But I mean, we all know Santa's real, so we ain't gotta play that game.
I'm your host, Daniel Powell, and welcome to the Grounded Presence podcast, where together we explore authentic identity, deep community, and the ever-evolving spiritual journey. But this week's a little different because we are exploring the ever-evolving holiday journey. because the way we experience the holidays changes as we age, and particularly the way we experience the magic of Christmas and the Santa myth changes as we age. We all interact with this Santa myth and this time of year in general in our own different and unique ways. And around Christmas time and the holidays, most of us have such a wide range and mixed bag of emotions. And this week's episode is an homage to the complexity, the comedy, the beauty, and the heartache that is the human experience. All as it can be seen through the lens of how we interact with this Santa myth, and more broadly, the holidays and Christmas time. And what follows here are stories and feelings that I've collected from 9 different individuals that I've talked to. And believe me, there are some gems in here, and I am so glad that I get to share all these with you. So let's get started here. First up is the tale of how my friend Brian Ivester learned the truth about Santa Claus.
I don't know if I ever did like the whole sit on Santa Claus's lap. That's a little creepy, going to the fake mall Santa. But I definitely did like the milk and cookies and carrots for the reindeer and writing letters. And my daughters and I still set out a glass of milk, cookies, and carrots. And my daughters are all in high school and 17, 16, 13. So, but I remember I was a young kid. I was probably 5, and my mom came to me and basically was like, "Hey, there's this family in need that, you know, they're not going to have any presents this year, and I promise I'll make it up to you, but I want to give them one of your gifts." And I remember I was a little 5-year-old kid, and I was supposed to get, like, I know I was supposed to get because I saw the present, the Millennium Falcon from Santa Claus. But my mom took that Millennium Falcon and gave it to this family in need. But before doing it, we had this whole conversation about it. It was like, okay. And so that was kind of so I was still really young when my parents started trying to convince me that Santa wasn't real.
Brian's probably in the statistical minority. I don't think many people out there can say that their parents actually tried to convince them that Santa isn't real. It's probably a much more common story to find out from some older kids on the playground or by overhearing your parents say something that you weren't supposed to hear. Or maybe the dream was even crushed by a chance encounter with the department store Santa who was taking a smoke break out back. But my friend Dr. Lauren Gorog is probably also in the statistical minority, in that her parents encouraged the fantasy for what her and many of us might consider to be a bit longer than is typically healthy. Her mom really pulled out all the stops to convince her of Santa Claus's existence. Here's her story.
That's funny because, you know, there's this one mom loves to tell people. She loves to tell people how she got me to believe in Santa Claus for a longer amount of time than was appropriate for my age. So it was until I was 12 because she rallied with all of the other adults to trick me and my cousin who stopped believing in Santa Claus and basically curated the whole Christmas to make us believe in it. You know, it's a big, elaborate story, but it really ended up shaming me because I went back and really believed again and told my friends, and the parents were just like, "What's wrong with you? And we should call your mom." And so they basically had camcorders back in the day. And so they just took video of everybody sleeping and stopped the, you know, camera. And the one person that was, I guess, my aunt recording, like, stopped. My mom recorded her sleeping, and then vice versa. And then a little video was left underneath a tree to show me and my cousin that Santa does exist, because who could have taken the video of the whole family sleeping?
Now the real problem comes when Lauren shares this recording with one of her friends as proof of Santa Claus's existence.
So Well, when I brought the tape back to my friend to show her that Santa Claus really was real, and I was like, no, we have to put this in your recorder. And her mom was standing in the back helping us work the TV and VCR and put it in. And I'm trying to explain like this miracle that has happened. And her mom like looked at me with, I think it was disappointment or concern, and like broke the news to me. And I just remember leaving and feeling very, very small. And then my mom, when I went back and told her, just kind of was like laughing. And I think it might have been a fight. I'm not really sure at this point, but that was the moment I found out. They really love the fairy tale kind of idea. It's funny now, but also I don't know how healthy that was.
Now, my personal experience with Santa Claus growing up was far different from Lauren's, and it was also far different from Brian's. My parents were very upfront with me and my sister from square one. They just said, hey, there's a Santa thing. Santa's not real, but it's really fun to pretend like he is. And we had a ton of fun with it. We would leave out the cookies and milk. We even had our own special recipe for reindeer food that we would sprinkle on the lawn on Christmas Eve to make sure that we attracted Santa's reindeer to our house. And it was like this mixture of crushed up cereal and candy bits mixed into that. So in the morning, Santa's cookie would have a bite taken out of it, the milk would be gone, and then there would be a little note left that had been signed by Santa himself. And I'm sure this was my mom's idea, but what she did is she drew out Santa's signature on a card in Elmer's glue, and then she covered that with multicolored sparkles for a simply magical looking note. And it was always a ton of fun living in this fantasy of Santa Claus, even though at the end of the day, I knew the truth, but I really don't think that it at all diminished my experience of the magic of Christmas. But probably one of the biggest reasons my parents chose to handle the Santa Claus myth this way was due to the way my dad found out that the Santa Claus myth was a farce. It was pretty jarring for his little boy brain. And you heard him on the intro to this episode. He was the one saying that as a child, he believed in Santa Claus lock, stock, and barrel.
Well, it was actually, a little embarrassing to me. I was in the 4th or 5th grade, and the teacher gave us a crossword puzzle. It was a simple crossword puzzle, and it had the name of the lead reindeer and all sorts of things. But one question was Santa was the clue, and let's just say it was 10 across. It was a 3-letter word, and I wasn't really sure. But when the teacher told us the answer was Dad, that was when I knew. And she said something along the lines of, and of course, 10 across is Dad, and I'm sure y'all already knew that. Well, yeah, I'm not so sure I did.
And learning the hard truth about Santa also had a bit of a domino effect in other areas of my dad's life.
A little sad. In fact, as I think about it, every time I think about it now, it's a little sad. Because that ended the magic. I can add that after that also, I began to wonder, okay, what other things am I going to find out about? I remember we lived in Texas, and my mom's folks lived in Tennessee. And we would go, it would take us a day driving to get to Arkansas, or several hours, whatever. And then, we would go on from there to Tennessee. And I remember thinking, so I wonder if it really takes us this long to go there, or are they taking us a circuitous route, a roundabout way to make us think that it's longer because they didn't want us wanting to go there all the time. So who knows? It wasn't like a major thing, it was a minor thing. And I discounted, I said, that wasn't the case, but it messed with my reality a little bit. And that's, one of the reasons that we decided to be upfront with you and your sister about that.
My dad's not alone out there. There are many with similar stories of feeling shaken, shocked, and embarrassed when they find out that the myth of Santa Claus isn't a reality. And it's really a shame that such a beautiful and magical fantasy has the potential to end in such a negative set of experiences. Here's Jeremy Herzer with a similar story.
When I heard some older kids, I believed in Santa till I was maybe, 7 or 8. And I heard some older kids at the mall talking about it, about, my mom still thinks I should believe in Santa, or something along those lines, something where they said, like, can you believe, something, still believe in Santa. And I remember in that moment being so angry at my parents, like feeling embarrassed and ashamed, like, how stupid could I be, to believe Santa Claus? Because, as a kid, you're always like, you want to believe, you really want that to be true. It's such an intoxicating and really comforting thought. And I remember associating that directly with God and saying, like, I wonder is God real? Is God the same thing? Is God made up as well? I'm not a parent, right? But if you want to tell your children, we do the Santa Claus game, right? Santa Claus isn't real, but we do the game. We do the kind of pomp and circumstance. Like, I think that's amazing. I think that's wonderful. But I think to say, no, trust me, believe in this thing, and then all of a sudden go, psych. I mean, I don't see how that can't have a detrimental effect. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's naive to say, nah, there's no way, there's no negative to that. It's all positive. That's just my opinion. And again, I'm not a parent, so any parent could listen to that and go, dude doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's entirely possible, but it was my opinion. As a former child, that's my opinion.
Jeremy's experience finding out that Santa Claus wasn't real feels like a very common one. But what isn't common is how he now looks back at his belief in Santa as a child. He'll share more with us about how he sees his belief in retrospect. And it's one of the most introspective accounts of believing in Santa that I've ever heard. For him, Santa represented so much more than just the magic of abundant gifts and childhood whimsy. For him, Santa represented the deep relational longing that we all experience.
I mean, we definitely, we would get up early and Santa Claus would have brought our gifts. So, and again, I fully believed that, lock, stock, and barrel. And as a matter of fact, I grew up in a really small town, and so outside of a really small town. So we would go to town. And I remember one time I was a little boy. I remember we had gone to this local restaurant, and it was, 100 people there. They had all the tables out, and it was like a Santa Claus was there. One of the, guys in town had dressed up as Santa Claus, and he was there to give out some gifts, and he gave out a few gifts, and then he's like, oh, ho, ho, I got to go, get my sleigh ready. And he left. And I remember like scrambling to get outside to see him fly away in his sleigh. And I remember just how crestfallen I was when I got out there and he was gone, and I think more than anything, this is not a Santa specific thing, but I think more than anything, what I've realized about myself as a child is that I wanted to matter to people, and I wanted to matter to Santa Claus. I wanted to know that Santa Claus knew me individually as a boy and valued me. So there were things like that we had a couple times where one time a neighbor dressed as Santa Claus and came to our house and gave us our gifts. And again, same drill. I remember like frantically trying to see Santa Claus get in his sleigh and fly away and like talk to him before, as he's getting into his, so I could have one-on-one time with Santa. But in terms of traditions, we didn't have any, we didn't have much. I will tell you, I always wanted a tube of chocolate chip cookie dough in my stocking. And I remember one Christmas morning, I ate the whole thing and I was so sick, just gnarly sick, which, God bless my parents, but I'm like, what are you thinking? So
I'm just so impressed with Jeremy's insights and self-awareness of his childhood self. My guess is that it's a relatively uncommon experience, projecting a deep relational longing onto Santa like this. But on the other hand, around this time of year, I don't think that there is one of us that can say we don't experience at least some form of deep relational longing. My friend Jonathan Bigelow experienced this in a different way. His family didn't celebrate Christmas when he was growing up, and as a child, he remembers looking in on the holiday and feeling like a bit of an outsider, desiring to take part in this cultural celebration.
No. No, like we didn't celebrate Christmas until I was 21. My parents, they had a whole bunch of different reasons for why we weren't celebrating it. And honestly, like looking back, I don't even know if they really knew why we weren't celebrating Christmas. But, I mean, I think like the reasons that were stated were that, it was a pagan holiday and its roots weren't even around, Christ's birthday. It was just basically like we couldn't be a part of this, cultural celebration because there was something wrong with it. And a whole bunch of reasons given for like why we were right and everybody else was wrong. I don't know. I think honestly, growing up, I wanted to celebrate Christmas. I wanted to celebrate Halloween. And I think, on a more fundamental level, that's probably a very human desire because it's part of like wanting to connect with, your generation and your culture, in a broader sense. Part of it's just like wanting to integrate and to feel like you're a part of what's going on. I think for me, that's what I was going for. And now my parents, celebrate Christmas. And I have mixed feelings because I think I have a lot of, associations with it from when I was younger. And now it's like we're doing it. And so it's like, just trying to let all of that go and just engage with it now as something that we do as a family, to connect with people. Yeah, I think that's hard in some ways because it's like, what was all of that, about, and realizing that, all of that is gone now. It doesn't exist, but it's definitely like part of my experience, and so just like trying to figure out how to, I guess, connect with the experience now,
It's just so interesting, the variety of ways that we interpret and celebrate this holiday differently. Jonathan and his family didn't celebrate the holiday at all because of religious reasons. And then some others celebrate it in a completely non-religious manner. And then there are even other families out there that celebrate it as primarily a religious holiday and do their best to exclude Santa completely from the equation. My friend Josh McDowell grew up in such a home.
Oh, so yeah, I don't remember a time that I ever believed in Santa Claus because mom always, she was always upfront about it. Most of my life was growing up with a single mom, and my mom's attitude was she wasn't giving Santa Claus credit for what she was busting her butt to try to do, and she didn't. I think from a religious standpoint, Santa Claus, the whole concept of Santa Claus bothered her, and so we never played Santa Claus. But she always said to me, even as a little kid, now don't ruin this for other kids because they believe in Santa Claus. Don't ruin it for your cousins. But, Santa Claus is not real. Santa Claus was like this fake thing. And I think my mom's fear was that if I believed in Santa Claus and then later in life found out Santa Claus wasn't real, maybe I would say, well, Mom, you lied to me about Santa Claus. You lied to me about the Easter Bunny. Did you lie to me about Jesus? Santa Claus was something in our family or in our family, it was just me and Mom, but that was like Santa Claus stole Christmas from Jesus. And so we grew up that wasn't spoken a lot, but that was kind of the underlying message, was that Santa Claus was off point. Jesus was the point. We sang happy birthday to Jesus at Christmas. At some point in my childhood, that would be a tradition. We would sing happy birthday to Jesus. So I guess that was a normal Christian family where we, it was we tried hard to make it about Jesus and not Santa. So I don't really, there's not really much about Santa in my background. No cookies, no milk. We didn't do that. The mom and I, mom built a house that, well, her brother helped her build a house, and so she was a homeowner. We grew up in a nice house, but other than the house, we were really, life was really, really tight. So if we had a cookie, there was no chance we were going to leave it out overnight. I mean, it was, it was just, that wasn't going to happen. A cookie was worth eating. You know what I mean? And since we didn't do the Santa Claus thing anyway, from that standpoint, there would be no, there was no reason to, so that never happened. The tradition we did have was when I woke up on Christmas morning, there were gifts unwrapped under the tree as if Santa Claus had brought them. But we treated the gifts like that, but at the same time, never pretended they were actually from Santa.
Both Josh and Jonathan's experiences are kind of similar because they are very religious in nature. But honestly, they really couldn't be on further ends of the spectrum. And these are both the more extreme and rare varieties of how people interact with the holiday. I think by and large, even though the season can drive all of us up a wall at times, most of us interact with the festivities in a pretty relaxed manner. And I've got a few more stories to share with you about the ways we interacted with Christmas and Santa as children. And these last few are just more pleasant reflections from what I think are the most normative perspectives on celebrating the holiday. And this is Joe Burnham recalling his experiences as a child.
All the standard stuff. We put out the milk and cookies. We'd watch the news as they were doing the Santa radar on the, with the weather, and we picked up Santa in this location, and it was like, oh, better get to bed because he's getting close. And we'd go downstairs. The rule on, what was the rule on Christmas morning? So the rule on Christmas morning was my parents had to walk into the room first where all the presents were, but there would be stuff out all over the place, and just tons of it was like unwrapped and just out and visible, and that was the stuff from Santa. And the stuff from my parents was all wrapped and had names and stuff on it. And so there was two distinct sets of gifts that way. But my parents knew that we would search for stuff, so they would actually hide stuff at the neighbor's house. And so they would have the neighbors store the stuff from Santa, and then they'd go over and pick it up after we went to bed.
Joe says that over the course of his entire adult life, even since his sophomore year in high school, the entire holiday season has just been a crazy, nonstop roller coaster of emotions. And I asked him to take a breath and try to reconnect with the emotions of what it felt like to be a kid, absorbed in the magic of Santa Claus. And here's what he shared with me.
There was just all kinds of energy surrounding Santa when I was, it's funny because it is the exact opposite to my initial response to the holidays. It's the exact opposite of that. It's enchanted, and it's mystical, and it's magical, and it's playful, and it's fun, and it's not work or striving or. Yeah, it is the exact opposite of it's just beautiful. It is really, yeah.
And as with all stories about belief in Santa Claus, the truth comes out and the magic fades at some point. But Joe was lucky enough to learn the truth in a rather gentle and non-traumatizing way.
Trying to think of when I sort of figured out that Santa wasn't real. Probably 8, something like that. 7, 8, just sort of put it together on my own. My parents did a really good job of making the whole Santa thing real. I just think I thought through the whole thing and just sort of logically evaluated it. It was like, yeah, I don't think that's actually what's going on. And it just sort of figured it, and then just asked my mom point blank. Actually, I asked her point blank when my brother was in the car, and she found some way of pushing off the conversation for a little bit. And then afterwards, when he wasn't around, told me. My mom was just like, well, there was this guy, St. Nicholas, and we aim to manifest his generosity, and that's where we get the idea of Santa Claus. So it's like how we're sort of honoring him. And so the goodness of that just tied to this actual person who existed at one point, and so the myth actually took on a different form. I remember once I figured it out, and then I was a little punk and told my brother. But then I set out on a mission once I got busted for telling him, I set out on a mission to reinstill his belief and make him think that actually I was wrong and I misspoke on that. And so I went out on this. I remember it must have been like the blizzard of '82, which was this huge, just came out of nowhere, totally unexpected on Christmas Eve storm that dropped like 4 feet of snow. It was insane. And my brother got a bike from Santa. And so I remember like, well, Santa must be real, because how else could you have gotten that bike? I mean, because we were searching for presents in the house and we couldn't find stuff. So I remember getting on board with the whole Santa thing, and he actually sort of like re-engaged that belief and held on to it for a little while longer.
Now that's the polished up Hallmark version of Joe's story. He, like most of us, has a complicated and rocky relationship with this season that we find ourselves in. But as far as belief in Santa goes, I don't think it gets much healthier than Joe's experience of it. Now, up next, we're going to hear from Nicholas Hoover, who has a similar story of a rather gentle and beautiful journey of how the belief evolved over the course of his childhood.
Like, even when we kind of realized that Santa may not be real, everyone still acted like he was real, and it's kind of like the spirit of Christmas was Santa, and it was more of a metaphor. And so we kept, we'd continue growing it that way. So in a way, he was real.
Nicholas learned the truth about Santa Claus by overhearing some other kids talking about it on the playground. And then after that, he had a conversation with his parents about it.
I think at some point I then talked to them about it, and that's when my mom told me about the spirit of Christmas and Santa as a metaphor and stuff like that. Because it is kind of I don't know, I always thought that was a little weird. It's like a huge lie almost that your parents are telling you. And when you find out, I don't know if I really saw my parents as people who lied at that point, And so when she told me about the metaphor of Christmas and giving and everything, I really kind of ate it up. Partially because I just believed in them in general.
Looking back at his family's Christmas festivities, Nicholas notes one particular tradition that he feels like began to gently usher in the notion that the Santa Claus tale might be more metaphor than fact.
So when we're all sitting around the tree, and after we've done the stockings with all the little toys and, candy and stuff like that, and we were starting to do the presents, someone acts as Santa's elf and gets presents for people, and they try to dole it out evenly, and so it's like a responsibility. And so I almost think that's like the beginning of seeing the whole thing as a metaphor.
Earlier, I shared with you my dad's thoughts on his experiences surrounding Christmas growing up. And now in the final segment here, I'm going to share with you some of my mom's thoughts and experiences. Around her house growing up, belief in Santa wasn't a huge thing, and it also wasn't eschewed. As she remembers, they engaged the belief in a mainly cultural manner. But when it comes to the matter of the magic of Christmas and aging, she really has some great insight and wisdom. So I'm going to let her speak the final words on the topic.
So that is, it's a magical time for children, no matter how we look at it, I think. I do remember the year magic went out at Christmas. I don't remember if that's a relationship of finding out Santa's real. I just remember standing in the kitchen, washing dishes, and Christmas had lost magic that it had when I was younger. It was I think, a gift of childhood that's there, and once it's gone, part of the mystery is gone. I don't know. That's just thinking out of the box. And so I do think it returns, though, in a way, when a person, not about Christmas itself, but when a person becomes able to look beyond the four walls of reality, of what seems to be reality. I'll never forget that movie we watched, Patch Adams with Robin Williams. I mean, one of the most significant things to me in that movie, and I may have shared this with you before, is the guy who was the I don't know, he was a brilliant man who was in the mental institution, but he was mentally ill. And Robin Williams, goes and talks to him, and he holds up his fingers, and he asks Robin Williams to count them. And Robin Williams counts 5. And he says, now, look past that. And if you ever do that and you look past it, what is there, 6 or 7 fingers there? In reality, there's 5 physical fingers. There's such a reality that's beyond our focus. And that's, I think, how faith, no matter what faith looks like for a person, allows a person to refocus past physical reality to something that's true. And anyhow, so that's a real meaningful scene in that movie for me.
You got to try this little experiment that my mom just mentioned. And in case that didn't make sense, what you got to do is just hold your hand out in front of you, stare at your hand, and then stare at a distant object past your hand. And when you do that, that shifts the way in which you see your hand. And it's a really interesting little experiment to try. On one side of the belief, Santa is as real as any physical object. It's as real as the 5 fingers on your hand in front of your face. But at some point, that belief fades. At worst, it gets stripped away and the whole thing just feels like a giant lie. And at best, the magic slowly fades away. But as we age, we can begin to see the beauty and the magic and the anticipation that it can bring to the lives of children. And we can begin to see beyond the myth, not focusing on the detail of the myth itself, but instead what it can bring to this insanely complicated experience of being human. And I've got to be honest with you, I don't know how we're planning to play the whole Santa story with my 3-year-old daughter here. We need to get that figured out before next year, probably. But I do know this. I want to do whatever it takes to help her be a person that sees beyond just the mere myth, and to be one who doesn't judge what she encounters in her life by measures of absolute truth, but rather looks at the world around her and extracts the beauty that she can find, rather than critiquing the parts that are flawed. And how this Santa Claus myth play into that exactly, I really don't know, and only time is going to tell. But for the rest of this holiday season, I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays, and however you're celebrating, do it up. Go all out and engage with it. And find the beauty wherever it may lie. Merry Christmas.